there is just something in women that rises when we see those who are defenseless being attacked, when we see injustices happening, whether it's to our own kids or it's in our community. We say, this is not right. Our own kids are fine, but now I'm fighting for the kid across the street. I'm fighting for the school on the corner. And I think that's something to embrace, that as women, in both the biological sense, the chromosome, all of the sense of what God made us to be, part of what He made us to be are to be fighters and to be those who stand on the side of the vulnerable. Hi, welcome to Wild and Beautiful. We're Joanna Hyatt and Jo and Enriquez, your co-hosts who every week are helping you live out your faith in a way that's biblically rooted but culturally relevant. So our least favorite holiday happens on Monday.
Hate it. I hate Halloween.
It's not even a holiday. Let's be honest. Halloween. We are the Grinches when it comes to Halloween.
I'm not against it.
I'm not against it either. I don't have like some hyper spiritualized reason that I don't think you should do it, because man, the Instagram wars from Christians about Halloween, I'm amazed at how much time people have. Really.
For sure.
Really. I mean, I appreciate that you think you're saving someone from like a pagan cult that they are a part of, but that kind of like check your history, because it actually started as a Catholic holiday.
It's the day before All Saints Day, which is a great holiday. And I love All Souls Day. I love Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, in a couple days. But this holiday, the going out and trying to make sure your kids don't get hit by a car when it's dark out, and they're like tripping over their costume, and then the whole costume thing. And the more kids you have,
the costume thing is what stresses me
yes,
out.
The costumes are stressful. They get expensive. Or then if you try to hand make it, it's like, I don't know, was it worth the $40 that I had to spend 4 hours on this? Like, I don't know.
Yes, I know. I have a friend, Bree. She's fantastic at doing costumes. Like the whole family gets into it. Parents do it. They have a whole thing. And I just wish I could ship my kids to her. She lives in another state, and be like, can you just handle this for 24 hours and then you can ship them back? You can even keep the candy. I don't need the candy. Yeah. Not fun for me.
We're the Halloween Grinches.
We are. But you know what? We love Christmas. So get ready for that,
and
folks.
Easter.
A lot of Advent, Christmas, goodness coming up. We have some fun things planned for you. But on that note, if you did dress up or your kids did, please do send us pictures at Wild and Beautiful Podcast at gmail.com.
Just so we can see how badly we did.
Yep. I told my kids I was not buying, and you have to make it work with whatever's in the house. So
I got a couple accessories for a couple kids, and we made it work with what we had. And then a couple were just so ginormous that I had to buy them a costume. So,
okay. Well, now I need to see pictures. Share it on Instagram, friends. But today we are talking about something that is equally spooky, scary. Yeah. I tried to transition it from Halloween to what we're talking about.
Good job.
It's all tricks, no treats. I don't even know how to, it's going to sound so big, but also we're coming at it from a very specific angle.
The erasure of women.
The erasure of women's virtue. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how you want to
there's the negative,
but our
and
launching
the
point.
The negative is the erasure of women, the antidote virtue of women.
So the launching point for us is this interview that was done with, I'm going to butcher the name. So
Dylan Mulvaney.
There you go. With Ulta Beauty Cosmetics. And then also Dylan did an interview with President Biden.
The president of the United States. The most powerful man on earth.
President of the United States.
Theoretically.
He won't do one-on-one interviews with actual media, but he'll do it with a
man who wants to pretend he's a girl. And by the way, that's the thing about Dylan Mulvaney. He's a big Instagram, social media. He has like 8 million followers on Instagram. But he's a man, a fully grown man who's a former Broadway star who doesn't just cross-dress as a woman. His whole shtick is that he's a girl. He's a girl, like a prepubescent girl.
Oh, he's not even pretending to be a woman?
Pretending to be a girl, which I find exponentially more creepy.
Next, he's going to be pretending to be a black girl. Or an Asian
or a
girl.
disabled, one-armed, a Native American girl.
Which you hear that, and friend, if you hear that and you think, oh, that's rude. Again, that's actually what's happening. It is this mental illness that is convincing oneself, and then trying to convince everyone around you that you are something that biologically you are not. that visually you are not
chromosomally.
You are none of these things. And so you're saying, but I'm this, and so now I want to be treated as this. And can you imagine how offensive it would be if a bunch of young white men decided to apply to colleges and say, we identify as Black males? There's a case before the Supreme Court literally being argued this week on affirmative action in colleges. And again, we would find that incredibly demeaning. We would find that an attack on the history of what Black men and women have endured in this country. And we would say, that's rude. That's rude. That's offensive. That's racist. Like, don't do that. And yet, when men are coming in saying, I'm identifying as a woman, or in this case, I'm a grown man identifying as a young girl, we have the president of the United States that sits down and says, you are beautiful.
We love you. Yeah. This is actually so offensive. Like, just like a Black person having a white person usurp their identity. I mean, I think that women should have a visceral reaction to this and be considering what we can do to push back against it, because this doesn't end well for anyone involved. It doesn't end well for the women, and we can go through why. And it doesn't end well for the men. I mean, you were telling me a story of a young boy who was like kind of went through a forced transition, and that didn't end well for him.
Well, what actually kicked off this whole gender sort of phenomena obsession off was in the mid-1960s, you had psychologist John Money. He's out of New Zealand, and he encouraged the gender reassignment of one of two twin boys. So the Reimer boys were born boys, and one of them experienced mutilation of his southern parts because of a botched circumcision. I don't know if kids are listening, and we didn't give a warning. So warning, maybe you don't want your kids to listen. This isn't actually about Halloween. And so he convinced the parents that because this poor boy, got basically a mutilated penis, raise him as a girl. It'll be fine. And so they did a reassignment surgery to construct sort of an attempt at female genitalia when he was an infant. And he was even given female hormones during puberty. And yet he struggled and struggled and struggled with this female identity until finally his parents told him, well, actually, you were born a boy. Oh, and so he then tried to go back to being a boy and living as a male. And unfortunately, he ended up committing suicide at 38. And his brother, who was always raised and treated as male, also would go on to commit suicide. And so you would say, well, this is a botched case. Like, that didn't work. And yet this case of this horrific, tragic end for these two boys has been what's used to justify thousands of sex reassignment surgeries for children and in cases of reproductive abnormalities. And so the basis of this whole gender experiment, because that's what it is, friends. It is an experiment. There is no conclusive scientific evidence that this is good. The basis is flawed, and the basis is rooted in destruction. And yet you have wide swaths of professionals proclaiming that this is a good thing and a good way to deal with what is a very real confusion in young people and in adults.
Yeah. And this failure to actually address the confusion by providing the counseling and the help that these people who are confused need, it is really, really affecting women. And I don't think that we talk about this enough. It's not a conversation that's even been mainstreamed, I think, in the conservative movement. I think it's just starting to be mainstreamed, but women are being harmed in real ways, in legal ways and societal ways. It's going to affect the way that our healthcare is presented to us and delivered to us. Women are being pushed out of sports. Can we just acknowledge that right now? Women are being pushed out of sports, high school and college, sports that have afforded women scholarships to achieve academic degrees. They are losing these opportunities because men who identify as female are taking those opportunities from them. They're also being injured in their sports. These stories are hard to find because a lot of news outlets don't want to report them, but women are very regularly severely injured by male athletes against whom they are competing because the boards that make the rules about their sport have allowed male athletes into the female sports. And males have undeniable physical differences from women, especially if they've gone through puberty before transitioning. You also have women are the ones that are contributing to the society as mothers. And now you have people like Dylan Mulvaney saying that he can't wait to one day be a mother. And I don't get I don't get offended by a lot of rhetoric that people use. It kind of rolls off. I don't take it personally. This one hits me personally because as someone who's delivered children, gone through the process of having periods, going through labor, delivering children, having deceased children and miscarriage, to have motherhood reduced to just, I don't even know what he's reducing it to have it reduced to something that it's not, that's offensive to me. And I think it should be offensive enough to some of us that we actually push back and start taking action. So this isn't good. Like you said, it's not good for the men who are misguided into thinking that physically presenting themselves as women will actually change their identity and fix their problems. And it's clearly on a societal level and an individual level, not good for women. So what do we do? And
you find what's ironic is you find that you are considered transphobic if as a man, you do not want to date a man who identifies as a woman. And you say, but when it comes to, I don't know, getting married and having sex, like it or not, you're still working with two male parts. And so it undermines and confuses so much. And it's no wonder that kind of every decade we've seen this steady increase of people who identify as LGBTQ, not because you're seeing an increase of people who actually are LGBT. That has actually stayed consistent, usually around 3 to 4% of people who say, this is just kind of how I've always been. And you can debate whether it's nurture or nature, but that growing number of people who are suddenly discovering this in their teens or in their 20s, it's because we live in a culture that is pushing this as the narrative and actually pushing this as the way that you're going to advance. I mean, now, right? Like if you want to compete in a sport, if you are biologically male and you go compete in a sport with biologically female players, you will dominate that.
Even if you were
suddenly you can win a gold medal
with your male colleagues.
Yes. And so, the whole point of women's sports, not the whole point, but one of the points of women's sports being carved out was so that women had an opportunity to compete and excel, because whether you like to hear it or not, biologically, we are different. One is not better than the other in terms of regarding more worth or whatever, but we are biologically different. And that complementary status of the two genders is important. And it was really frustrating to me as a mom of 4 girls to watch the absolute either silence of the mainstream feminists or actually the promotion of mainstream feminists of basically shoving women out of the marketplace, shoving women out of sports, shoving women out of everything back into the shadows, I guess. In a sense, you think, what happened, feminism? I guess you're being exposed for what you are, which is that you were not actually about the promotion of women being respected and women being considered equal. You were basically a political agenda that was going to cater to whatever the prevailing winds were, and actually an attack on women. And when feminism is rooted in abortion, it's an attack on women. And this is just the next step.
Yeah, it kind of...
Can you tell we're angry?
It kind of feels like the default gender in feminism and in the transgender movement is male. The default gender, the people who are going to by default win out of this. Because the feminists gave us, for example, abortion on demand, which didn't help women. Yep. It enabled men to have sex with whoever they wanted to and not have to deal with the responsibility of it. It didn't really help women in any way. It left a lot of women scarred. It left a lot of women still getting pregnant and then just feeling that they had no choice but to procure an abortion. That's just one example. But then
it also enabled men to treat women in the workplace as men instead of making adjustments in the workplace to accommodate women who become mothers.
Yeah. Now you're seeing, instead of companies expanding their maternity leave, they're paying for women to travel out of state to get abortions if they work in pro-life states. And just on the physical differences between men and women, really quick, if you don't fully appreciate the physical differences between men and women, watch the CrossFit Games. You can watch them on YouTube. This is like the place that I have seen the absolute picture of the difference between male and female, because the CrossFit Games still keep men and women completely separate, competing in their own divisions. But these are women who are like stronger than almost any man you would ever meet on the street. These are women that can deadlift 400 pounds.
Oh, I know. I have seen them and they are intense.
And then you see the men. The reason I suggest watching the CrossFit Games, I'm biased because I do CrossFit, but also because the divisions, the different races that they do and stuff are like back to back. So you can actually watch the women do them and then watch the men do them and see the difference in real time because they do the same thing. The men will deadlift 700 pounds. Like, I mean, the strongest woman on earth is deadlifting 400, maybe 500 pounds. These men are specimens, you guys. The differences between men and women are not deniable. So if you just have any question about that, because I hear people say like, oh, Serena Williams could beat, another really great male tennis player. No, she can't. She can't. Serena Williams can beat any woman, but she can't beat a male in tennis.
Not to mention, there is a beauty in the fact that our bodies are made different. Okay, I'm going to come at it from ballet.
There you go.
There's a beauty when you have a male and female dancer and the man is being fully male in his dancing. He has worked to the peak of his ability because ballet is strenuous. And when the woman is fully expressing her femininity and yet her strength and watching the interplay of those two is beautiful. And both of them actually are better for the complement of the other gender being there, of the other physical form that is a contrast to their own. And we, I think in best circumstances, when we see that interplay happening in a marriage, when we see that happening in society, when we see, this dance essentially of men being men, and that doesn't mean they look a certain way, but men fully living out their masculinity as God has created that. And the beauty is that there is variety even within masculinity and same with femininity, but everybody flourishes. I remember thinking as I was dating my husband, one thing that impressed me about him is that he was enough man that I could be all the woman that I had been made to be. And it was in dating him and then marrying him that I actually discovered more of who I was created to be because I wasn't trying to compensate like, okay, well, you're kind of weak on this part, so I'm going to have to cover for you there. And it was like, no. I can rest. And I found out I'm more creative than I realized because I had a husband who's creative and gave me the freedom to do that. We actually miss out when we're all trying to become something we were not created to be.
Maybe we should have started with this, but here's a little theological foundation. We were made in the image of God. I think we say this on every episode of our show, but men and women were individually or specifically made in the image of God. Why? Because there is a complementarity in the Trinity that is expressed in human creation as male and female. There is a complementarity, not a competition. And I think that's the thing that our culture misses. It sees the difference between men and women, and it interprets that as competition. And the way that humans have expressed the differences between men and women in a lot of parts of history, I can see why that would be your takeaway, that women have been oppressed in times of history, that women haven't had all of the dignity and equality that they deserve. But then you can overcompensate and go too far in the other direction and go in the direction of competition. What God created was complementarity. And I have a John Paul II quote. Of course.
It's been a while since you had a JP2 quote.
My man, JP2. So he has a couple of really great documents that we'll put in the show notes. One is called Dignitatem Mulieris, or maybe it's the other way around. My Latin is rusty. That one is really good.
My Latin is non-existent. So
I majored in it, so that's embarrassing. But he has a great encyclical on women, and it's cool because it goes through the biblical examples of women, of course, with the Blessed Virgin Mary, as we call her in our Catholic faith, goes through her example in the Bible, but it also goes through the woman at the well, the woman caught in adultery. How did Jesus treat her? The women who were the first to see Jesus after the resurrection, and what's the significance that it was women who first saw Jesus after the resurrection. So I really recommend that. But then his letter to women is phenomenal. And that's what I'm going to read from. And he said, I love this. He said, progress usually this is 2 paragraphs, so just hang with me. Progress usually tends to be measured according to the criteria of science and technology, which is so true. Like that's how our modern world measures what is progress. Nor from this point of view has the contribution of women been negligible. So yeah, we've had great female scientists and doctors and everything. Even so, this is not the only measure of progress, nor is it in fact the principal one. Much more important is the social and ethical dimension, which deals with human relations and spiritual values. In this area, which often develops in an inconspicuous way, beginning with the daily relationships between people, especially within the family, society certainly owes much to the genius of women. Genius of women. Isn't this great? The feminine genius is this thing JP2 is known for. Then he goes on to say, "It is thus my hope, dear sisters, that you will reflect carefully on what it means to speak of the genius of women, not only in order to be able to see in this phrase a specific part of God's plan which needs to be accepted and appreciated, but also in order to let this genius be more fully expressed in the life of society as a whole, as well as in the life of the church." So good. So women offer to the world, men, we can generalize, they're more pragmatic. They think more black and white in a lot of ways. And women are bringing in the emotion and the relation and the beauty to a situation. And you need both. These are, again, complementary. Yes. These are not competing qualities. When you have both of them in a household, in a family, in a work relationship, in a friendship, this is beautiful. Great things can come from it. But in our society, we so often just want to say, we're scientistic, right? We've made science our idol. And we just want to measure things by how good was the update of the app? What does the algorithm look like today? Show me the chart.
Well, and women actually have this ability to elevate a culture. So there's this fascinating video from Acton Institute. It's called The Economics of Sex. And it goes through, and we'll link to that one because it's a really fun one to watch. It's one of those kind of sketch ones. And they show how, when women basically kept the standards high for marriage, if you want to have sex with me, you have to get married. You saw more people getting married. And then as women lowered that bar and said, well, in order for you to have sex with me, you don't have to get married. It's now this. And the bar got lowered. Who was hurt by that? Not men. It was women. And it was actually culture as a whole has become more coarse, has become more crass. We have seen culture as a whole unravel. You have more children being born out of wedlock. You have more people on poverty, in poverty, on welfare, all of these things. I mean, the numbers are staggering actually. And we talk a lot about how the 1960s and the sexual revolution really messed a whole lot of stuff up. And one of the big lies was telling women, oh, you can have sex just like men. Why would I want to have sex just like men? Where were the women who stopped and said, that seems like a terrible idea.
Where were the ones that were
I do not want to.
No thanks.
Ew, I don't want to have sex like men. And we could have a whole conversation I think we have on how men are also impacted by these kind of transactional relationships that are encouraged. But it did not help women and it did not help society. And where women get to step in is to bring back this idea of virtue. I think you asked at the beginning and I ran right over it. How do we as women bring back and model virtue? And the biggest examples in our homes, which no one likes to hear that because it's so unpopular, but nothing about this podcast is popular because we say the thing you shouldn't say out loud.
Which is why we know you guys are all afraid to leave a review. Just use a pseudonym, make a fake name and leave a review because we love it.
But let's unpack that. What do we mean when we say one of the biggest ways that a woman can exercise and elevate virtue is in the home? Yeah. Are we advocating barefoot and pregnant?
No. And
in front of a stove?
It's not women who need to caricature what being a woman is. Lean into it and be who you are. There's this, I think it's Catherine of Siena. She said, be who God created you to be, who you were meant to be, and you will set the world on fire. We see the antithesis of this in the drag queen, for example, the man who looks at women and says, oh, it means to take on makeup and put on a gown and wear heels. And we're no, let us show you. And I think when it comes to starting in the home, it's our maternal instinct and it's our role as mothers that really animates what that means. And I believe that women can be mothers, whether they're physically mothers or not. We're called, all of us, no matter how naturally masculine or feminine you are. I mean, I personally have like more of a masculine bent to the way that I go through the world and see life, but I still am called to nurture the people around me and to look into a situation and to see, how can I bring more gentleness into this situation? How can I nurture these people in this situation? And I think that that's something that we tell women now, that you don't even start to explore that until you're physically a mother. And that's not helpful.
Well, and for 20-something-year-olds, you know, we know you're there listening. Hi. And we know that right now the idea is like, oh, how horrible to become a mother. It's the end of your career. It's the end of your dreams. You know, I was talking to a young man who said, because I said something about parenting, and I was talking about, he said, that's so refreshing because most of the women I meet in their 20s are terrified of how this is going to ruin their body. Yeah. And I looked at him and I said, well, what those women fail to realize is their body is going to change regardless. You will not look like your 20 self. You're going to go through menopause. Sorry. It happens,
but that's valid,
right?
Because my body really changed when I had my first kid. And I realized like, this is my self-gift to this child.
No, it totally is valid. It is. I had that fear. And as somebody who has struggled with body image issues, that first one especially, you're terrified of what is this going to do to me? But what I've come to realize is like your body's going to change anyway. And I would rather my body bear the marks of sacrifice than my body simply have changed. And I'm sort of caught unaware and finding myself on the other side, realizing I'm alone. I didn't pour myself into anything. You know, and there's a difference of intentionally avoiding motherhood versus you pursue motherhood and God builds your family in ways you didn't expect. Builds your family outside of the home, and maybe you don't ever raise homes, but your attitude and your posture and your perspective is towards loving the people that God puts in your life. And this idea that we have this whole generation coming up terrified of having kids, terrified of whether that's, you know, through adoption or fostering or basally expending their lives for somebody other than themselves. It's actually really sad. I think they're being angry. Cheated. Yeah, they're being cheated.
That's exactly right. They're being cheated. It's the key to happiness is being withheld from them. It's being dangled out of their reach. And that really does make me angry for this young generation that isn't being told that giving yourself and sacrificing for others, it's not just a nice way to find happiness or the way some people choose. It's the only way. You will not find it in materialism. You will not find it in trying to please yourself. You just won't. You'll find maybe pale imitations and think that it's happiness. But when you have a child or you pour yourself out for somebody who's not a child, but you're living that maternal instinct, that is where you're going to find happiness.
And where we are actually going to change culture. You know, I've been thinking about that. I have mom friends who are fighting these very battle of these redefining of words in their small circles of influence in the community groups that they are in the PTA and things like that. And realizing that it's that, you know, we talk about that like mama bear instinct that women have. Nobody is looking at men who identify as women saying, man, you really have that mama bear instinct. There is just something in women that rises when we see those who are defenseless being attacked, when we see injustices happening, whether it's to our own kids or it's in our community. We say, this is not right. Our own kids are fine, but now I'm fighting for the kid across the street. I'm fighting for the school on the corner. And you know, I think that's something to embrace, that as women in both the biological sense, the, you know, chromosome, all of the sense of what God made us to be, part of what he made us to be are to be fighters and to be those who stand on the side of the vulnerable, which is, you know, also why you so often see women fighting on the side of abortion, fighting on, you know, against sex trafficking, fighting, you know, for those who are poor, because in us is this nurturing, caring, you know, sense, and it changes our communities when we do that. It's not going to be the big talking heads that ultimately win this culture battle. They're going to try. That's why they have interviews with the president of the United States, thinking if we can make this look mainstream, we win. But it's in all these tiny little battles happening in our neighborhoods and in our cities.
That ideology does not have mainstream support right now. And I think the reason that you and I feel so passionate about being controversial and speaking out against this right now is because if we don't, this will become the norm. The mainstream media and the president and the left is telling you that trans ideology, women being men, men being women, this is all normal. Move on with your life. This is not something that you need to fight anymore. But the reality is there is not mainstream acceptance of this. There was a poll recently, I think it found like 80% of Americans agree that trans ideology isn't the best thing for our children. It's not the best thing for our culture. But if we don't say something, if we don't start addressing the change in culture, just like everything else that's come before and has become mainstreamed and has gained majority acceptance, this will. And so that's why we're going out on the limb and being the ones that are possibly going to get canceled by speaking.
But it comes also too from a place of compassion. And I know it doesn't sound like that when we have these strong opinions because that's, our fiery side coming out, but it's compassion too for those currently living confused.
Absolutely.
Because even if you have this platform, even if you have a lot of people applauding you, you are still by yourself at the end of the day, and you have to live with that. And what I see when I see that happening is I see somebody crying out to be accepted, and they have not found their creator. They have not found the one who says, let me help you understand why I made you the way I did. And things happen, and there's traumas, and there's confusion, and that healing and that untangling has to happen. But it's compassion for those that right now are living confused.
Yes.
And if you don't think it's confusion, go start looking up stories of detransitioners. Those are people who underwent surgeries, hormonal therapies to try to become the gender that they felt they identified with, only to realize, sometimes devastatingly so, this was a horrible decision, and they're trying to go back. And those stories are being silenced. And if we're going to have this pushed as a society, we need to have honest conversations about the fact that this is not working well, and it's actually destroying people. A great book is Irreversible Damage by Abigail Schreier. It's been blocked on Amazon. It gets attacked. You got to love the people of tolerance who hate dissenting voices, kind of like the party that is so concerned democracy is not going to succeed when people get to vote. But anyway, that's a different tangent. But it's such a great book because it looks at so many of these teenagers who showed no gender questioning, no confusion, nothing until they hit their teen years. They hit puberty. Listen, as two women, we can tell you puberty is not fun. It's not fun going through those changes. But society is telling these kids now, the problem is your body, not this is part of growing up. And YouTube and TikTok are contributing to this. And so these kids get caught up, and it's so sad, but you really have to read the book.
No, on the point of compassion, I want to be very clear, and I know I speak for you when I say this. Our angst is not with the people experiencing gender confusion.
Agreed.
At all.
Agreed.
If anything, I view them as just as much a victim as the rest of society.
Yes.
My beef is with the architects of this ideology who are creating it and disseminating it. The mainstream media, big corporations, political parties, and academia. They know what they're doing. They knew they were experimenting on an entire generation of people without having any idea what the outcome would be. We're just now starting to see the rotten fruits of it. And instead of reversing course and saying, we made a huge mistake, they're doubling down. That's who I have a problem with. And I think that we're not going to get very far if we place our opposition against the wrong group of people. So yes, it's not the confused people. It's the architects of the ideology that I have an issue with.
Which is a good reminder of knowing who essentially is your opposition, who's your enemy in a sense. The enemy is not the person who is another pawn, another victim in this, just on the other side of the coin. And keeping that in mind. And again, how do we stay tender, even as we're fighting for these things? Praying for those people. We need to be praying for Dylan as we see him being trotted out, because what's happening is he's being used as a pawn. And at some point, he will cease to serve a purpose to the transgender ideology. And when that happens, he will get chucked aside. And that, because that is what we see happen repeatedly. When you no longer serve their purpose, you're gone. There's no attachment. There's no love. There's no caring for you. There's no community. And so those of us who are believers in this world, knowing who you're fighting, what you're fighting, and also continuing to pray for those who right now look like they're against us, but may one day be our biggest allies in pursuing virtue and righteousness and truth in this world. Okay, so friends, what a conversation. It's a start. It's a part of a much larger continuing conversation that we hope to keep having, and we have here over at Wild and Beautiful. And we hope that it has given you some things to think about. We hope it's encouraged you. Please, as always, like and share this podcast, rate it. It ensures that people get the truth in a culture that is trying very hard to twist it. Until next week, stay wild and beautiful.